Ethan Hale had never thought of himself as a hero. He wasn't a soldier, a diplomat, or a famous explorer. He was an engineer, a repair specialist who had spent most of his life fixing things humans didn't even know were broken. When the war with the Aradel Empire had started, he had been assigned to starship maintenance, working on vessels that carried soldiers, supplies, and hope across hostile space. He had thought of himself as invisible, just a part of the human machine keeping the fleet moving. But now, the Aradel Empire itself had taken notice of him, and nothing would ever be the same. The summons came without warning. At first, he thought it was a mistake, a bureaucratic error. His name had appeared on a glowing holoscreen that shone in his small Earth apartment. A single line scrolled across, simple and stark. Ethan Hale. Report immediately to the Aradel delegation. Your presence is required by Her Majesty Queen Seraphis. He had stared at it for minutes, convinced someone was playing a cruel joke. The Aradel Empire, the alien rulers who had once brought half the galaxy to its knees, wanted to see him. Him, a human engineer. He didn't know whether to feel honored, terrified, or both. When he mentioned it to his supervisor at the fleet, she only shook her head. Ethan, you didn't do anything famous. You just helped someone in the field. That's not exactly the kind of thing queens notice. But someone had noticed. When the Aradel escort arrived at Earth's orbital station, it was nothing like any human delegation Ethan had ever seen. The ships hovered silently, their surfaces shimmering with colors that seemed impossible. There were no weapons drawn, no aggressive posturing, just a quiet, overwhelming presence that made every human observer instinctively step back. Two towering figures emerged, their armor glinting under the light of the station. They moved like dancers, every motion precise and deliberate, their eyes glowing faintly with an inner luminescence. Ethan Hale? One of them asked in perfect English, though the voice had an ethereal, melodic quality. Yes, Ethan said, trying to steady his voice. That's me. You are summoned by the Queen. Prepare to depart immediately. Before he could process, he was ushered aboard their vessel. The interior was unlike any ship he had seen. Floors and walls shimmered as if alive, constantly shifting colors that somehow calmed him despite the sheer alienness of it all. Holographic displays floated mid-air, showing complex star charts and energy readings that he instinctively understood, even though he had no formal training in Aradel technology. When they arrived at the Aradel capital, the sheer scale of the empire stunned him. Towers of crystal stretched into the sky, floating platforms hovered in perfect synchrony, and entire rivers of light ran through the city. Ethan felt small, almost insignificant. But the escorts treated him with respect. He was human, fragile. And yet here he was, walking unafraid through an empire that had once seemed unstoppable. Finally, he was brought to the palace. The audience chamber was enormous, larger than any room he had ever been in, and entirely alien. Towers of crystal rose toward the ceiling, and streams of glowing energy ran through the floor like liquid light. Hundreds of Aradel nobles were seated around him, their forms elegant and diverse. Some had wings, some had multiple arms, some had skin that shifted color with emotion. All eyes were on him, and Ethan felt every one of them like a weight pressing down on his shoulders. Then she appeared. Queen Seraphis entered with a quiet grace that silenced the entire chamber. She was taller than most Aradel, her skin a soft blue that glimmered faintly, her silver eyes calm yet piercing. Her presence alone seemed to command the room. Ethan felt his knees weaken slightly, but he forced himself to stand tall. Ethan Hale, she said, her voice like smooth glass, carrying over the murmurs of the court. You saved my life. Ethan blinked. I don't understand, Your Majesty. I didn't do anything special. You did, she interrupted, and the words were gentle but firm. 6 months ago in the debris field of the Kyle Rift, you rescued me when I was stranded. You had no idea who I was, yet you acted without hesitation." The memory hit him with startling clarity. The Kale Rift had been a nightmare. Ships from both sides had been destroyed in the chaos of battle, debris scattered across a silent void. He had found a tiny escape pod, barely visible among the wreckage. He hadn't known who was inside, enemy, ally, civilian. He just knew someone needed help. He had patched the pod together, repaired the life support, and guided it safely away from the debris. And then, he had never thought of it again. He had no idea the person inside had been Queen Seraphis herself. "You saved my life," she repeated, stepping closer. Her eyes held a warmth that made Ethan's chest tighten. "And because of that, I am here to choose my reward." The chamber held its breath. "And my reward," she said, her voice echoing, "is you." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Me?" he whispered, unable to find any other words. "Yes," Seraphis said. "I choose you. You will remain by my side, not as a servant, not as a token, but as someone whose actions remind me what true courage looks like." The nobles erupted in murmurs, some gasping, others whispering indignantly. Ethan felt every eye on him, every judging glance like a physical weight. This was insane. A human, a simple engineer, standing as the chosen reward of the Aradel Queen. I don't understand," Ethan said again, his voice shaking slightly. "I'm just a human. I'm not—" "You are more than you think," Seraphis interrupted, stepping even closer. "You acted when others hesitated. You showed compassion when others ignored life. That is a rare quality, even among my people. And that is why I choose you." Ethan swallowed hard. He wanted to protest, to explain that anyone in his place would have done the same, but somehow, the words wouldn't come. Seraphis gestured, and one of the nobles handed her a small metallic shard. Ethan recognized it instantly. It was part of a repair tool he had used inside the pod. He had forgotten it there in his haste to save her. "You see this?" she said, holding it delicately. "I kept it, as a reminder, as a symbol of the difference one life can make." Ethan felt his throat tighten. He had never thought of his work as important, never imagined that something so small could hold significance in the grand scheme of a galactic empire. And yet here it was, being revered by the Queen herself. Before he could respond, the chamber doors burst open with a sharp alarm. Guards rushed in, their movements urgent. "Your Majesty, a faction of nobles refuses your decision. They demand the human be surrendered at once, or they will take him by force." Ethan's stomach twisted into knots. He had expected surprise, maybe curiosity, but not this, political revolt. He looked at Seraphis, unsure whether to step back or stand his ground. She did neither. She lifted her chin and faced the crowd with a calm that seemed almost impossible. "They will not touch him," she said, her voice carrying over the chaos. "Ethan Hale is my choice, and I will protect him even if the Empire revolts." The nobles froze, the weight of her command pressing down on them. Ethan realized something then. He was no longer just a human engineer. He was part of a story larger than himself, a story that involved entire civilizations and the life of a queen. "Why me?" he finally asked, his voice barely audible. Seraphis stepped close, her glowing eyes meeting his. "Because, in the moment that mattered most, you saw me as a life, not a threat. That is something worth more than gold, technology, or star systems. You reminded me of the value of compassion and courage, and that is a rare gift. That is why I choose you." Ethan's mind raced. He felt the weight of history pressing down on him, yet there was a strange warmth in her words, a certainty that made him feel both terrified and honored. Outside, the murmurs of the court continued, but inside, in that room, it was just the two of them. The alien queen and the human engineer. One choice had changed everything. One simple act of humanity had altered the course of an empire. For the first time in his life, Ethan understood that his actions, even small ones, could resonate across galaxies. And now, standing at the center of the most powerful empire he had ever seen, he realized that life had a way of turning ordinary people into extraordinary legends, and he was about to become part of one. Ethan had barely taken a breath after the shocking announcement when Queen Seraphis gestured for him to follow. The chamber doors opened to a long corridor filled with a soft, glowing light that shifted color as they walked. It was as if the palace itself acknowledged his presence, making him feel both out of place and strangely important. The walls were not solid, but flowed like liquid crystal, changing in texture and pattern. Some sections showed abstract images of stars and galaxies, while others displayed shimmering streams of information that Ethan could barely comprehend. He realized almost in awe that this was not just a building, it was alive, responding to the people moving within it. "Where are we going?" Ethan asked, trying to sound calm despite his racing heartbeat. "To a private chamber," Seraphis replied, her voice soft but steady. "There, I can explain my decision without the interference of others. You deserve that much." Ethan nodded, though he barely understood. The entire day had been overwhelming. The summons, the long flight through space in an alien vessel, the palace that defied imagination, and now this personal meeting with the Queen, who had chosen him as her reward. He tried to make sense of it, but every step seemed to pull him deeper into a world he had never known. When they reached the chamber, it was unlike anything he had imagined. The floor shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting a sky that did not exist. Floating platforms of translucent crystal moved slowly through the air, carrying delicate plants that glowed with soft light. There was a quiet hum in the room, a vibration that seemed to resonate within him. "Please sit," Seraphis said, gesturing to a platform that descended gently to the floor. Ethan obeyed, lowering himself onto it, feeling a slight sensation of weightlessness. "I owe you an explanation," she began, folding her hands in front of her. "Not everyone would understand why I chose you, and not everyone would accept it. But you deserve to know." Ethan leaned forward slightly. I'm listening." Seraphis's eyes softened. "When you rescued me, I was in a state of despair. The empire was fragmented. My people had suffered tremendous losses, and my position as queen was not yet secure. In the debris field, I was vulnerable in ways that I had not allowed anyone to see. I had to maintain an image of strength, but there, in the pod, I was only myself, afraid and fragile." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He remembered that day in the Kyle Rift. The endless debris, the silence of space, the tiny escape pod adrift among wreckage. He had seen the life signs inside the pod and acted without thinking. He hadn't known who he was saving, only that someone needed help. "You didn't know who I was," Seraphis continued. "You could have ignored me. Assumed I was an enemy, but you didn't. You acted with compassion and courage without hesitation. That is why I chose you." Ethan shook his head. "I just did what anyone would do. I mean, I didn't even know it was a queen." Seraphis smiled, but it was a smile filled with a quiet intensity. "Most would not have acted as you did. Many would have calculated risk, would have hesitated, would have ignored the problem. You did not. You saved me when no one else would." He looked down at his hands, suddenly aware of how ordinary they seemed. How could such simple hands, which had only repaired equipment, have mattered to an entire empire? And yet, here he was, standing, or rather sitting, before the queen of the Aradel Empire, and she was telling him that his actions had changed history. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Seraphis reached into the folds of her clothing and produced a small metallic shard. Ethan recognized it instantly, the handle of a tool he had used inside the pod. He had forgotten it there in his rush to help her. "You left this behind," she said, holding it delicately. "I kept it. It serves as a reminder of the difference one life can make. Even a human life can change the course of events in ways that are unimaginable." Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. He had never considered himself important. He had thought of his work as minor, unnoticed, and routine. And yet, this simple fragment, something he had almost discarded, had become a symbol in the hands of the Aradel Queen. Before he could speak, an alarm suddenly echoed through the chamber. A deep, resonating sound that vibrated through the floors and walls. Ethan instinctively jumped, his heart pounding. Seraphis' expression changed from calm to serious, though she did not panic. "It seems that not everyone in the court agrees with my decision," she said, her voice low but firm. "Some factions believe my choice of a human is an insult to the Empire. They demand that you be surrendered immediately." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "Surrender? To whom?" "To those who oppose me," Seraphis replied. "They are powerful, influential, and willing to act against their own queen. But they will not touch you. I will not allow it." The queen's words were calm, but they carried an authority that Ethan had never encountered before. The Aradel were known for their strict hierarchy, their devotion to protocol, and their respect for power. And yet, here was their queen, declaring to the entire empire that she had chosen a human, and no one would interfere. Ethan swallowed hard. Why me? Why choose a human over the nobles, over the warriors, over the everything else? Seraphis' silver eyes softened, and she leaned slightly closer. "Because, in that moment in the Kale Rift, you acted not as a soldier, not as a noble, not as a representative of any species, but as a life-saving force. You reminded me of what the universe can be, of what true courage and compassion look like. That is a gift more valuable than all the wealth, technology, or land in my empire." He felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He had never thought of himself as a hero, never imagined that a single act could resonate so far beyond his world. And yet, here it was. A queen had chosen him not because of his power, but because of his humanity. Suddenly, the chamber doors opened again, and a group of guards rushed in. "Your Majesty, a faction of the court has mobilized," one of them reported. "They are moving to seize the human. They threaten rebellion if their demands are not met." Ethan's chest tightened. He had expected surprise, curiosity, perhaps admiration, but not conflict. He looked at Seraphis, unsure of what to do. Seraphis did not hesitate. She raised her hand, and the entire room fell silent. "They will not touch him," she said, her voice carrying authority and resolve. "He is my choice, and I will defend that choice with every resource at my command." The nobles froze, and Ethan realized the enormity of the situation. He was no longer a simple engineer. He was the center of a political storm, a symbol of the Queen's judgment, and perhaps even a test of the Empire's loyalty. "But why me?" he asked again, his voice small against the weight of history. "Because," Seraphis said softly, "you acted without fear, without calculation, and without expectation of reward. You acted because it was right. That is something few possess, even among the strongest warriors and wisest leaders. You have reminded me, and through me the Empire, of the power of compassion, of courage, and of humanity itself." Ethan shook his head. "I don't feel special. I just did what I thought was necessary." "That is precisely why you are extraordinary," Seraphis said. "The universe measures worth not in ambition or conquest, but in the choices we make when no one is watching, when no reward is expected, when the stakes are highest. You chose life. You chose courage. You chose the right path." Ethan felt a strange mixture of pride, disbelief, and fear. He had never imagined that his actions, small, ordinary, human actions, could carry such weight. And now, standing in the presence of the most powerful being he had ever encountered, he realized that life had a way of placing ordinary people in extraordinary positions. Outside the chamber, the murmurs of the court continued, but within the glowing walls of the Queen's private chamber, there was only Ethan and Seraphis, one human, one queen, and a bond forged not by politics, wealth, or power, but by the simple act of saving a life. "You have changed everything," Ethan whispered, finally finding words. "No," Seraphis replied, her silver eyes shining with a calm light. "You have reminded me of everything I must protect." "That is far more powerful than change. It is the future of the Empire itself." Ethan realized then that he was no longer just a human engineer. He was part of a story that would shape the lives of billions. He was part of a legacy he had never imagined, chosen not for his status, not for his strength, but for his heart. And for the first time in his life, he understood that heroism was not about glory or recognition. It was about courage, compassion, and the willingness to act when it mattered most. And he had done just that. The alarm continued to echo faintly through the palace halls, but Queen Seraphis remained calm. Her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned the floating crystal corridors as if seeing a solution invisible to everyone else. Ethan followed closely, his mind racing with questions, doubts, and a growing sense of fear. The Aradel nobles were powerful, cunning, and merciless, yet the Queen's quiet confidence seemed to shield them both. "You are brave to stand with me here," she said softly, her voice carrying the faint hum of authority. "Many humans would have panicked, many would have fled, but you remained." Ethan swallowed hard. "I didn't choose to come here to make trouble. I can't let you face this alone." She smiled faintly, a mixture of admiration and concern. "That is why I chose you. Not as a symbol, not as a prize, but as someone who understands what it means to act when the stakes are highest." The corridor opened into a massive chamber, the center of the palace's defensive systems. Panels of shimmering light displayed energy flows, shield barriers, and alerts from the entire city. Aradel guards moved swiftly, recalibrating systems and reinforcing weak points. Ethan had never seen technology like this. The entire palace seemed alive, responding to threats in real time. But even so, the Queen's human choice had caused tension. Factions were mobilizing against her. "Ethan," she said, "your perspective may be the key to maintaining stability." "My perspective?" he asked, still trying to comprehend how his ordinary human mind could influence an empire. "Yes," Seraphis replied. "You approach problems differently. You see patterns where others see only complexity. You have a mind that adapts, learns, and acts when circumstances are uncertain. That is precisely what we need now." He nodded hesitantly, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. "I'll do what I can." She led him to a control console, a semi-transparent platform that hovered slightly above the crystalline floor. Panels of light shifted as he approached, showing data streams he could almost understand intuitively. Ethan examined the energy grids, shield frequencies, and control nodes. His human mind, used to improvisation and practical solutions, immediately picked out flaws the automated systems had overlooked. "These energy nodes are overlapping incorrectly," he pointed out, gesturing toward a cluster of glowing panels. "If the attackers force through this section, the entire defensive grid could collapse. We need to reroute power to stabilize the system." Seraphis's eyes widened slightly in approval. "Then do it. Use the system as you see fit." Ethan took a deep breath and began recalibrating the nodes, rerouting energy flows to reinforce the palace shields and create controlled barriers. He worked with speed and focus, aware that even a small mistake could have catastrophic consequences. Around him, Aradel engineers and guards watched cautiously, some skeptical, others curious. A human was altering the defenses of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. As he worked, he noticed patterns in the rebel forces' movements. Their ships formed blockades, but the formation was unstable. Energy fields were misaligned, creating a vulnerability that he could exploit. "If we overload this section," he explained to Seraphis, "it will collapse part of their blockade without causing any casualties. They'll be forced to retreat or reorganize, giving us time to reinforce defenses." Seraphis nodded slowly. "Do it. I trust your judgment." He focused on the task, his fingers moving quickly across the floating interface. Streams of data and energy responded to his adjustments, stabilizing the palace shields while simultaneously exploiting weaknesses in the attacker's formation. Within an hour, the plan worked perfectly. The rebels' blockade collapsed, and the palace's outer defenses were fully stabilized. The Aradel generals watched in stunned silence. A human, a single engineer, had just outmaneuvered an entire faction of highly trained alien strategists. "You have done what few could," Seraphis said quietly, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Your actions have saved countless lives, and yet the danger is not over. The rebels will not give up easily." Ethan looked around, feeling the tension tighten like a coil. "What's their next move?" "They will attempt a direct assault on the palace itself," Seraphis said. "Their pride will not allow them to retreat without a final strike." He nodded, his mind already calculating possible scenarios. "Then we need to prepare the inner defenses, evacuation routes, energy barriers, strategic positions for your guards. If they force their way inside, we need every advantage." Seraphis's gaze softened. "You are not just a problem solver, Ethan. You are a partner in this struggle, and that is exactly why I chose you. Not as a reward, but as someone who stands beside me in the face of adversity." The next hours were a blur of preparation. Ethan worked alongside Aradel engineers, soldiers, and strategists, implementing new protocols, adjusting energy flows, and reinforcing barriers. Despite the language differences and the alien interfaces, he found a rhythm with the Queen's forces. His human logic, honed in countless repairs and improvisations, complemented the Aradel technological brilliance perfectly. As the first rebel ships approached the palace, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. The alarms blared, warning lights flashed, and the floating walls of the palace shimmered with energy. Seraphis stood at the central platform, her staff glowing with a faint inner light. Ethan could see the determination in her eyes. She was ready to defend her choice, her empire, and the human who had become the center of a political storm. The rebels struck, but the defenses held. Shields flared, energy pulses redirected attacks, and the palace itself seemed to respond to Ethan's adjustments. Rebel ships were forced to retreat, reorganize, and attempt multiple attacks, each one less coordinated than the last. Ethan's confidence grew. He realized that his human mind combined with Aradel technology was an unpredictable factor that the rebels had not anticipated. Their assumptions about human weakness and inferiority were proving dangerously wrong, but the rebels were cunning. They regrouped, sending a small team directly into the palace, bypassing the outer shields. Ethan watched as the alarms indicated intruders moving toward the central chambers. He felt a chill run down his spine. This was personal. This was direct. "Ethan," Seraphis said calmly, her voice steady even as the palace shook with distant explosions. "You must stay here and continue to manage the defenses. I will confront them directly." "No," Ethan said, instinctively stepping forward. "I can't just stay behind. I won't let you face this alone." She looked at him, a mixture of admiration and concern in her eyes. "This is not your battle. You have already done more than anyone could expect. Your role is crucial here. The palace, the energy flows, the barriers, they depend on you. If you leave, we could lose everything." Ethan hesitated, torn between his instinct to protect her and the responsibility she entrusted to him. Finally, he nodded, realizing that his contribution, though less visible, was just as important as her frontline courage. Seraphis gave him a small, reassuring smile. Then do what you do best. Protect the palace, protect our people, and remember, courage is not measured by physical strength alone. As the intruders advanced, Ethan monitored their movements, rerouting energy, sealing corridors, and creating controlled traps. Each adjustment was calculated, precise, and effective. The rebels were skilled, but they had underestimated the combination of human ingenuity and Aradel technology. Meanwhile, Seraphis confronted the intruders in the Grand Hall. Ethan could see the communications feed, showing her standing tall against dozens of armed rebels. She did not hesitate, did not falter, and yet she did not kill. Her approach was strategic, firm, and commanding. She spoke to them, her voice carrying over the hall, asserting authority while offering a choice: withdraw or face the consequences of their actions. The rebels wavered. They expected fear, panic, or hesitation from a human-aligned queen. Instead, they found resolve, intelligence, and the calm presence of someone who would not yield. Ethan watched, his heart pounding. As the tide of the battle turned, the rebels, confronted by both the technological defenses he managed and the Queen's leadership, began to retreat. One by one, they fell back, their pride wounded, their strategy foiled. Finally, silence returned to the palace. The alarms ceased, and the glowing walls of the chambers dimmed to a soft, ambient light. Ethan slumped slightly, exhausted, but relieved. He had faced an unimaginable challenge and survived, his human ingenuity playing a critical role in defending an entire empire. Seraphis approached him, her expression softening. "You see, Ethan, courage and wisdom come in many forms. Today, you have proven that humanity has a place among the stars, not just as observers, but as active participants in shaping the future." Ethan shook his head, still trying to process the events. I just did what seemed right. I didn't expect to change anything." Seraphis placed a hand on his shoulder. "And yet, you did. And that is why I chose you. Not for glory, not for reward, but because you reminded me, and the entire empire, of the power of a single human life guided by courage and compassion." For the first time, Ethan truly understood what it meant to be chosen. Not for his status, not for strength, but for the simple, extraordinary impact of his actions. He realized that heroism was not measured by titles, weapons, or wealth, but by the choices one makes when faced with impossible circumstances. And he had made the right choice. The palace had finally quieted, but the tension was far from over. The rebellious nobles had retreated, but their anger lingered like a shadow across the Aradel Empire. Queen Seraphis walked beside Ethan through the halls of the palace, her silver eyes scanning for any sign of trouble. The glow of the crystal walls reflected off his human features, highlighting the fatigue and awe etched into his face. "You did remarkably well," she said, her voice calm but warm. "Without your guidance, the palace might not have held." Ethan shook his head, still trying to process the whirlwind of events. "I just did what I knew how to do. The credit is yours. You were the one confronting them directly, making them retreat without violence." Seraphis smiled faintly, but her gaze held a seriousness that reminded him of the stakes. "Leadership is not always about confrontation. Sometimes it is about making the right choice at the right time. You made the right choice, Ethan. That is why you are here." They reached a balcony overlooking the glowing heart of the city. The floating platforms, the shimmering gardens, and the crystal towers stretched into the sky in a panorama that seemed unreal. Ethan had never seen anything so beautiful, so alien, yet so alive. He realized that the empire itself was like a living organism, responding to the choices of its queen. "Do the nobles accept me now?" Ethan asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and anxiety. They are learning, Seraphis said. Some still resent my decision, but many have witnessed the results. They cannot deny the strength that comes from wisdom, compassion, and courage. You have reminded them and me of what truly matters. Ethan's mind flashed back to the Kyle rift, to the pod he had saved without knowing who was inside. He had acted out of instinct, out of humanity, without thought of recognition or reward. And yet, that small act had now altered the course of an empire. He felt a swell of pride mixed with disbelief. How had he ended up here, standing beside a queen who ruled millions, facing challenges he could never have imagined? Seraphis turned to him, her gaze gentle but firm. Ethan, there is something I must ask. He looked at her, unsure of what could possibly follow. Will you remain with me? She asked. Not as a guest, not as a token, but as a partner. Someone whose insight, courage, and humanity I can rely upon. The Empire is rebuilding, and the future depends on the choices we make together. Ethan felt his heart tighten. The question carried weight far beyond personal loyalty. It was a call to step fully into this new world, to accept responsibility not just for himself, but for the Empire itself. He swallowed, trying to form words that matched the enormity of the moment. I don't know if I'm worthy, he admitted. I'm just a human. I've never led armies or commanded anything like this. You are worthy because you act with integrity, Seraphis said firmly. You lead in ways that others cannot, because your courage comes from understanding life, not seeking power. That is the essence of true leadership. He looked at her then, truly seeing her for the first time, not just as a queen, but as someone who had survived, struggled, and yet chosen to trust him. I will stay, he said finally, his voice steady with resolve. If you will have me. Her expression softened, and she extended her hand. Then we will face the future together. Ethan took her hand, and in that simple gesture, he felt the weight of the Empire, the responsibility of choice, and the promise of partnership. Together they turned back toward the heart of the palace where the nobles had begun to regroup. Word of their decision spread quickly. Some nobles still resisted, but many began to approach them cautiously, curious to witness the human who had earned the queen's trust. Ethan observed their reactions, realizing that his presence was no longer a curiosity. It was a symbol. He had proven that humans, often underestimated, could stand on equal footing with the most advanced alien civilizations. Your Majesty, one senior noble said, bowing deeply, the humans, your choice. They have shown remarkable capability. Perhaps we underestimated them. Seraphis nodded. Perhaps we did. And perhaps it is time to learn from what we have seen. Courage, compassion, and intelligence are not confined to a single species. They are qualities we must nurture wherever we find them. Ethan felt a quiet pride. He had always believed in human potential, even when the galaxy seemed to dismiss it. Now, standing in the center of the Aradel Empire, he understood that humanity's place among the stars was not just possible, it was vital. The days that followed were filled with planning, rebuilding, and forging new alliances. Ethan worked closely with Seraphis, advising on technological innovations, defense strategies, and even diplomatic decisions. His perspective, grounded in human experience and practical problem-solving, complemented the Queen's vision perfectly. One evening, after a particularly long day of strategic planning, Ethan found himself alone with Seraphis in a quiet observation room. The stars stretched endlessly beyond the crystal walls, a reminder of the vast universe beyond the Empire. "You've done more than I could have imagined," Seraphis said softly. "You've not only saved my life, but also strengthened the Empire in ways few could comprehend." Ethan shook his head, smiling faintly. I just did what I thought was right. You made it all possible by trusting me. She studied him for a moment, her silver eyes reflecting the distant stars. Trust is a two-way street. You have earned it, and in doing so, you have reshaped the way we view humanity. You have reminded us that greatness is not measured by species, but by actions. He felt a warmth rise within him. For the first time, he truly felt a part of something larger, something extraordinary. I never imagined a life like this, he admitted. I was just a repair engineer. Now, I don't even know how to describe what this is. Extraordinary, Seraphis said simply. You are extraordinary, and together we will guide this empire into a new era, one where humanity and Aradel walk forward side by side, stronger than ever. The weight of her words sank in. Ethan realized that his actions, small as they had seemed at the time, had ripple effects far beyond what he could have imagined. A single human had reminded a galactic empire of compassion, courage, and wisdom, and in doing so had secured a place for humanity among the stars. In the weeks that followed, the palace became a hub of innovation and cooperation. Humans and Aradel worked side by side, exchanging knowledge, technology, and culture. Ethan found himself at the center of this transformation, his human perspective providing insights that the most advanced alien minds had overlooked. The rebellious nobles gradually accepted the changes, realizing that the Queen's choice had strengthened the empire rather than weakened it. Ethan's presence became a symbol of unity, a reminder that courage and intelligence are not confined to a single species. One evening, as Ethan and Seraphis walked through the palace gardens, the glowing plants casting soft light around them, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. From a small act of compassion in a drifting pod to standing beside the Queen as a trusted advisor, his life had changed in ways he could never have predicted. You know, he said quietly, I never thought saving someone would lead to this. I just did what seemed right. Seraphis smiled, her hand brushing against his. And that is why you were chosen. Your actions remind us all of the power of simple choices, of doing what is right, even when no one is watching. That is the essence of greatness, Ethan. He nodded, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time, he truly understood that heroism was not about glory or recognition. It was about courage, compassion, and integrity. And he had embodied all of these qualities, not for fame or reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. As they looked out over the glowing city, Ethan realized that the galaxy had changed. Not just the Aradel Empire, but the perception of humanity itself. Humans were no longer outsiders, no longer underestimated. They were partners, innovators, and allies capable of shaping the future. Seraphis turned to him, her expression both gentle and determined. Ethan, there will be challenges ahead. The galaxy is vast, and not all will understand our choices. But I have no doubt that together we can face whatever comes. You have already proven your worth beyond measure. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of purpose he had never known. Then I'll stay, not just as someone you saved, but as someone who will help shape the future with you. And so the Queen, who could have chosen power, land, or treasure, chose something far greater. She chose a human, not for what he could command or conquer, but for the courage, wisdom, and humanity he represented. Together, they began a new chapter, one where humans and Aradel worked side by side, shaping a galaxy that valued compassion, intelligence, and courage above all else. In the end, it was not technology, armies, or wealth that secured the future. It was a human who acted with integrity, a queen who recognized the value of that integrity and the choices they made together. And that was the true power of humanity among the stars. The empire had been saved. The rebels had been humbled. and a single human engineer had proven that ordinary actions, guided by courage and compassion, could change the course of history forever. Ethan stood beside Seraphis, looking out at the horizon of the glowing city. For the first time in his life, he felt that he belonged. Not just to Earth, not just to humanity, but to a galaxy that had been waiting for someone like him. And in that moment, he knew that this was only the beginning.